A referee raised his whistle and ended a match 5 minutes early. Then, he did it again. A watching world reached one verdict instantly together. He was a cheat, bought, drunk. 15 years at the top of his sport, and in 90 minutes, he became a punchline. Not one of the millions watching saw the truth. They were watching a man's brain fail live, and they called it a choice. Welcome to Diagnosis Glitch.
This story is based on documented events. All names are real. His name is Janny Sikazwe. In January of 2022, he was 42 years old and he held one of the most respected jobs in world football that almost nobody can name. He was a referee. He was born in Kapari-Mposhi, a town in the middle of Zambia, in 1979. And before you picture a man who lived only inside stadiums, understand this. Away from the game, Janny Sikazwe was a schoolteacher, an ordinary man with an ordinary day job who happened to spend his weekends at the center of enormous events. And they were enormous. He refereed the final of the FIFA Club World Cup in 2016. He refereed the final of the Africa Cup of Nations in 2017. In 2018, he became the first Zambian ever to referee at a World Cup, walking out for Belgium against Panama and Russia. 15 years at the very top of his profession. Whatever went wrong on the afternoon we're about to describe, it did not happen because he did not know his job. He knew it better than almost anyone alive. Here's the detail that reframes everything that follows. When a human body overheats past a certain line, the first organ to break down is not the heart and it's not the legs. It's the brain. Doctors define heat stroke by two things happening at once. A core temperature climbing above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit, and the brain beginning to malfunction. The nervous system is the most heat-sensitive tissue you own, and when the body starts to cook, its distress is very often the first thing anyone can actually see. Not a dramatic collapse, not a man clutching his chest, something much quieter and much stranger. Confusion, a senseless decision. So the earliest sign that a person's cooking to death can look from the outside exactly like a character flaw. That is the whole story. A man's brain began to fail in the most visible place imaginable in front of a watching world, and the world did not see an illness. It saw a villain. It was the 12th of January 2022, the Africa Cup of Nations, a group match between Mali and Tunisia in the coastal town of Limbe, Cameroon. The heat that day was punishing and the air was thick. By Sikazwe's own account, the humidity sat somewhere around 85%. This is the kind of afternoon the human cooling system was never built for. 90 minutes of running in full sun in soaking air that will not let sweat evaporate. Around the 85th minute, with the match still alive and no reason on earth to stop it, Janny Sikazwe raised his whistle to his lips and blew for full time. About 5 minutes early. His own assistants told him he had ended it too soon. Confused, he restarted the game, and then seconds before the 19th minute, with no stoppage time added, he blew for full time again. The reaction was instant, and it was merciless. On broadcasts around the world, commentators reached for the only explanations that made sense to them. He was corrupt, he was bought, he was incompetent. Some said he looked drunk. And he was not helping his own case because across that same match, he had made other strange calls, 2 contested penalties and a red card to a Mali player that the television replays could not justify. Every one of those decisions was read as evidence of a crooked or hopeless official. Not one person watching read them as what they actually were. The misfires of a brain that was overheating in real time. Remember that first whistle? The first thing his failing body did was not to fall down, it was to make a decision. This is the part of the story where a normal patient meets a doctor. Janny Sikazwe met a watching world, and it had already made up its mind. Because here's what's truly happening to the man in the middle, in his own words, described later once he finally understood it. He was not scheming to cheat anyone, he was fighting to stay conscious. Quote, "I started getting confused. I could not hear anybody. The voices of his own assistant referees speaking into his ear all match were fading out. His brain was losing the ability to process sound, and then it did something far more frightening than go quiet. It began to invent sound. Sikazwe described hearing things that were not there. Quote, "I reached the point where I could start hearing some noise and I thought someone was communicating with me and people were telling me, no, you ended the match." He was hallucinating instructions. His overheating brain manufactured voices, and those phantom voices are part of why he blew that whistle when he did. There's one more detail no one could invent. The communication device clipped to his head, connecting him to his officials, felt to him like it was burning. Quote, "The communication device became too hot, and I even wanted to throw it away. This is how bad the situation was. His own skin was misreading temperature, and when he tried afterward to explain the decision that ended a nation's match 5 minutes early, he did not reach for tactics or rules. He reached for the only thing that fit how he had felt from the inside. Quote, I think God told me to end the match. He saved me. A man was drowning on dry land in full view of the planet, and the planet called him a cheat." And then the story turned because Janny Sikazwe did not walk off that pitch and drive home. He was taken to a hospital. What the doctors found was not a corrupt official or a nervous one. It was a body in crisis. The head of the refereeing for the Confederation running the tournament stated it plainly afterward. Quote, "He had heat stroke and was suffering from dehydration. The confusion, the fading hearing, the phantom voices, the burning skin, every symptom the world had read as guilt was a textbook sign of a central nervous system being cooked from the inside. And it had come terrifyingly close to the end. In Sikazwe's own account, the doctors did not soften it. Quote, "The doctors told me my body was not cooling down. It would have been just a little time before I would have gone into a coma, and that would have been the end. Minutes. He was minutes of failed cooling away from a coma he might never have come back from on a football pitch while the world typed jokes about him." Then the detail that should stop you cold. The very next day, they ran him through the full battery of tests. Heart, blood, a physical examination. Every result came back normal. There was nothing wrong with the man. There had never been anything wrong with the man. What nearly killed him was not inside his body, it was the afternoon he had been sent out to work in. To understand how a whistle becomes a symptom, you have to understand what heat actually does to a brain. Think of the body as a machine with a hard temperature ceiling. Every cell runs on proteins folded into precise shapes, and those shapes only hold below a certain heat. Push past it, and the machine does not fail gracefully. It fails the way software fails under load. Everything runs fine at rest. Fine on a mild day. Fine for 80 minutes. And then the demand spikes past what the cooling can handle and the whole system browns out at once. That is the name this thing deserves, the crash that only happens under load. On a cool morning, Janny Sikazwe could referee flawlessly. Put him under 90 minutes of sprinting in wet tropical heat and the hidden bug ran. And the first component to brown out is the nervous system. As core temperature climbs, neurons take direct thermal damage. The barrier that normally protects the brain from the bloodstream begins to leak. The brain swells and inflames. And the regions that govern coordination, judgment, and the processing of what you hear degrade before almost anything else. The result, in order, is a grim and predictable march. Confusion, disorientation, hallucinations, seizures, coma. Janny Sikazwe made it to the third station on that list, hearing voices on the pitch before anyone got him off the field. Every step he had already taken, the world had watched live and called cheating. But the brain's only where it starts. Once the ceiling is breached, heat stroke stops being a problem of temperature and becomes something much larger. The body begins to turn on itself. Start in the gut. That intense heat and the way blood is pulled from the intestines toward the skin wreck the lining of the digestive tract. That lining is a wall. Its job is to keep the bacteria in your intestine on their own side of it. When it fails, fragments of those bacteria, molecules called endotoxins, leak into the bloodstream. Your immune system reads that leak the way it reads a massive infection, and it answers with everything it has. A flood of inflammatory signals pours into the blood. The scientists who study this describe heat stroke not as simple overheating, but as a systematic inflammatory condition with features resembling sepsis. On the inside, an overheated athlete looks like someone with blood poisoning. Nothing has infected him. His own defenses, tricked by a leaking gut, are burning the house down to kill an intruder that was never there. Then the blood itself misfires. The lining of the vessels, injured by the heat, spills proteins that flip the blood into a clotting state. The body throws tiny clots throughout its own circulation and burns through the very factors that let blood clot at all. The end stage of that has a name that tells you how bad it is. Disseminated intravascular coagulation, clotting and bleeding everywhere at the same time. And then the organs begin to fall, one after another like dominoes. The muscles, cooked and starved of blood, begin to dissolve, spilling their contents into the circulation. That flood of muscle debris clogs the kidneys and poisons the rhythm of the heart. The kidneys fail. The liver is injured. The brain swells further. One trigger, one afternoon over the line, and every major system in the body starts going down together. Here's the part that should frighten anyone who's ever told an athlete to tough it out. There is no drug for this. No pill or injection reverses it once it's started. There's exactly one treatment, and it's a clock. You have to cool the body fast, and you have to cool it before you do anything else, because every extra minute spent above that ceiling is more brain cooked, more gut leaked, more muscle dissolved. The single greatest predictor of whether a person lives is how many minutes they spend over the line. Cool them inside the first few and they can walk away. Miss that window and no hospital on earth can undo what the heat has already done. And the stakes are not small. Exertional heat stroke is one of the leading causes of death in athletes during physical exertion, and the ones who survive are not always whole. People who live through a severe episode can be left with lasting damage to the brain, the kidneys, and the heart. Janny Sikazwe walked away the next day with clean test results. That is not the normal ending. That is the lucky one. You would think the near death would be the climax of this story. It's not. The most telling moment came afterward, and it belonged not to a doctor but to a committee. Because while Janny Sikazwe was being told he had been minutes from a coma, the institutions of football were busy processing a scandal. About 25 minutes after that second whistle, there was an attempt to bring both teams back onto the pitch to play out the missing minutes. Tunisia refused to return, and then Tunisia lodged a formal protest over a match that had been ended too early. Sit with the shape of that. A man had nearly died on the field, and the response of the system was to open a case file about the score. The Confederation reviewed the protest, and it rejected it. The result stood. Mali had won 1-0, and the paperwork was closed. Nowhere in that process was there a line for the referee who had been carried toward a hospital. The institution did not examine the near-fatal illness of its own official. It examined whether the correct number of minutes had been played. It adjudicated the symptom and never once talked about the patient. The bureaucracy moved faster to defend a scoreline than anyone had moved to ask why a healthy man had started hearing voices in the middle of his own job. So what happened to Janny Sikazwe? He lived. He recovered fully, the tests stayed clean, and in the days after, once he understood what had actually happened inside him, he spoke about it with a grace the internet never extended to him. Quote, "What I now believe is that we failed. We did not succeed. But if you fail, what is important is to rise." He rose, he kept working, but something did not come back so easily. For a long stretch of time, to a huge part of the watching world, Janny Sikazwe was not the referee who nearly died of heat stroke doing his job, he was the ref who blew the whistle early. The punchline, the failure of his body was public and instant. The correction, the truth that a man had been dying in plain sight arrived slowly, quietly, and to a fraction of the audience that had laughed. Now step back, because Janny Sikazwe is not a freak accident, he's a preview. 2.5 years later, on the 25th of June 2024, an assistant referee named Umberto Panho was working a Copa America match between Peru and Canada in Kansas City. The heat index on the field was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the humidity above 50%. Near the end of the first half, Panho collapsed onto the grass. A Canadian goalkeeper was the first to reach him. He was stretchered off and taken to a hospital where the cause was given as dehydration in the brutal conditions. He survived, and Kansas City, where he went down, is one of the 16 host cities of the 2026 World Cup. A city about to stage football's biggest tournament had already put an official on the grass. Now, meet the man who did not survive it, and who proves the cruelest part of this entire story. His name was Corey Stringer. He was an offensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, 6 feet 4 inches tall, 336 pounds, a first-round professional with a full training staff, air-conditioned facilities, and a doctor on site. He had everything Janny Sikazwe did not have on that field in Limbe. On the second day of training camp in the summer of 2001, in the morning heat index climbing into the high 90s, Stringer pushed through the practice, then collapsed. By the time anyone measured his core temperature, about 90 minutes after he stopped moving, it read 108.8 degrees Fahrenheit. He died the next morning. He was 27 years old. Understand what that means besides Sikazwe. Every resource money and elite sport can buy, and the same physiology killed him anyway. The difference between the referee who lived and the athlete who died was not care and it was not toughness. It was minutes and it was luck. Sikazwe's collapse happened to take the shape of a bizarre decision that stopped the match and got him to a hospital. Stringer's took the shape of a strong man refusing to quit. Out of Corey Stringer's death came an institute at the University of Connecticut that exists for one purpose: to stop athletes from dying of heat, and it's now the loudest scientific voice on the tournament ahead. Its chief executive put the 2026 World Cup in a single sentence. Quote, "This World Cup is the World Cup for the sports scientists because the heat and hydration is such a huge factor." Because this is not history. As these words are being recorded, that tournament is being played across North America inside a heat dome. Matches are kicking off under warnings of a feels-like temperature of 40 degrees Celsius and higher. Researchers flagged roughly 1 in 4 of the tournament's matches for potentially dangerous heat before a single ball was kicked, and of 16 stadiums, only 3 can fully air-condition the pitch. The final, in July, will be played in an open bowl in New Jersey with no roof at all. And for the first time in the history of the competition, every single match now carries 2 mandatory breaks in play, just so the players can drink and try to shed some heat. That rule has become the loudest argument in the sport. Players and coaches spar on live television over whether the game should stop for the heat at all. A star player, after dropping to the ground dizzy in a match at the very venue that will host the final, said it plainly, quote, "I got dizzy during a play and had to drop to the ground. Playing in these temperatures is very dangerous." 4 years after the whole world read Janny Sikazwe's cooking brain as a bad referee, the sport is finally arguing out loud about how to keep a brain from cooking on the pitch. It sees the bug now. It just cannot agree on the patch. In an earlier story on this channel, a boy jumped into a lake to cool off on a summer day, and 6 days later his brain was gone. The most ordinary hot weather thing a person can do, and it crossed a hidden line, and the brain paid first. This is the same shape wearing different weather. The same summer, the same everyday heat, the same organ failing before anyone thought to look at it. Because the glitch was never the heat. Heat is honest. It does exactly what physics says it will do to a body pushed past its ceiling, and it's done it forever. The glitch is that when a brain begins to overheat, its very first cry for help does not look like a cry for help, it looks like a choice. And a watching world will always, every single time, choose to diagnose a man before it will diagnose the air around him. That first whistle, the one we told you to hold on to, the world called it a decision. It was a symptom. And this summer, in 16 cities, under the same sun that nearly took Janny Sikazwe, the same heat is leaning on every player, every referee, and every child in the stands, waiting for one more brain to make one more decision that the watching world will be all too ready to call a choice.
We reach for a villain faster than a reason. Show a crowd a man doing something senseless in the heat, and it reaches for a verdict. Janny Sikazwe was never the punchline the world made him. He was the warning. This summer, another brain will misfire in front of millions, and the crowd calls it a choice. This is Diagnosis Glitch. I will see you in the next waiting room.